Can you share?
I don't know. Can you see it?
Not yet, but we see the very smart books behind you. Now we can see it, yes.
Okay, there's books behind me. All right. So let's see.
That's very nice what the film is doing there.
Yeah, all right. So no, I only have bad books here. All right. So very nice to be here virtually. And thank you for inviting me. And it's good to see all of you again. It's nice to see your faces, and hopefully I'll see you in person sometime soon. This talk is about learning bad and about how to design bad recommendations to make people do stupid things in a profitable way for whoever is making them do those stupid things. It is joint work with this guy on the first slide. That guy, Yefim. And he's very good at learning bad too. So he's my inspiration for this work.
Thank you.
All right. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to design markets. In addition to Yefim being an inspiration, another inspiration is, sometime the 2 years that I spend at Amazon making recommendations to sellers in a terrible way to try to make them to learn bad. And I'll get into that in a second. So the idea is to design markets, which is what Amazon is a market designer. In markets that provide advice and change beliefs of people, and then to measure all of that. Okay, so we're going to warm up with, and by the way, each one of those, there's basically 1.5 papers here. Yefim and I have been working on these papers for who knows how many years. So I'm expecting this to be submitted to a journal by the year 3000 or so. We'll just eat our vegetables and try to stay alive for a long time. But they're nevertheless, even though they've been taking a long time, they're very important to us, and they have really important points to say. Okay, so the first one, the warm-up, is the paper that Efim and I have with Mike Rebello about a financial advisor trying to make recommendations to an investor. And in this case, the investors and advisor are not fully aligned, but they're partially aligned. That is, there are two states of the world, and in every experiment I'm going to describe, there's going to be two states of the world. So the advisor, there's always two states of the world. The advisor knows the state. The advisee does not know the state. The advisor has an incentive to lie to the advisee. The advisee knows that, and so on. All right. So here there are two states. The advisor is aligned in one state and not aligned in the other state. So let's go through. This is the picture. This is the actual picture that people are seeing on, in the experiment. Yefim made it look pretty, so everything I show you is Yefim designed it. Okay, it's 100% him. So this is what he did. There are two states here, alpha and beta. The advisor can give an advice of A or B. A is corresponding to basically saying that the state is alpha. B corresponds to the state is beta. You can see from the payoff matrix, so there's investor and advisor. The way we decided to show this is very convoluted. I'm not sure why we did this way, but Mike Rubello really liked it. But the way this matrix, the payoff matrix works is the first column. So you can ignore that last brownish column. It basically says that, the investor has an outside option of 1,000. So just look at the middle column with its two little mini columns. You can see there the advisor always prefers that if you were going to accept, the advisor always prefers to give you the recommendation of B, because it gives the advisor like at least twice as much money, sometimes 10 times more money in state beta. Okay, the investor just wants to be told the truth. Okay, so you can see that when state is beta, they're aligned. The advisor wants to recommend B. The investor will accepting B, but the problem is the investor doesn't know the state. So the equilibrium is kind of complicated here. The equilibrium, because the two are aligned under beta, in equilibrium, the advisor is going to be honest in the state beta and will recommend B. Given that, so now go backwards, do some Bayesian stuff. I mean, it's not no math needed. Okay. Given that the advisor is always honest when the state is beta, if you see A, then you know for sure that the state is alpha. Right? The advisor is honest in beta. So the only time that you see A, you know that the state is alpha. Cool. So given that, the advisor is going to have to mix 50-50 when seeing alpha. So I forgot to say the two states are equally likely. So alpha and beta are each with probability 1/2. So if the advisor mixes 50-50 when he sees alpha, right? And he tells the truth when he sees beta, then the investor should expect to see beta 2/3 of the time. Right? So if he sees beta 2/3 of the time, right, then they see beta, they don't see beta, they see B 2/3 of the time. But when they see B, right, when they see B, they know that they're 2/3 likely to be in, when they see B, they know that, that they're 2/3 likely to be in beta and 1/3 likely to be in alpha.
I have a question. This is a repeated game?
This is a repeated game, yes.
Okay.
It's a repeated stage game. So there's no like repeated game strategy. This is just a repeated stage game. I guess you learn to build trust and whatnot. So it's a two-person repeated, decision. Right. So anyhow, so what's happening here is that when they see B, they know that they're 2/3 likely to be in beta and 1/3 likely to be in alpha. If they're in alpha, they're going to get 0. The investor is going to get 0. If they're in beta, they're going to get 1,500. So 0 times 1/3 plus 1,500 times 2/3 is going to be 1,000, which is their outside option. So when they see B, they're indifferent between choosing they're different between accepting and rejecting.
I have another question about repeated games. In repeated games, there are many equilibria because every deviation can be punished in many ways. So,
right. So, right, but here they can. I suppose that they can. The only way to punish is to reject the advice, which will give the advisor 0. Right. So that's basically they have a binary choice here.
well, in repeated games, they can have many mixed. But anyway, let's go on.
They can do tit for tat, grim trigger, right? They have the general things here. They can never believe again. They can not believe for a few times. Yeah. But we're not analyzing repeated game strategies here. We're just analyzing this as a learning game. So you'll see that, you'll see that in a second. Then we'll talk about repeated game stuff. All right. So this is the results advisor. I put that old because this is the original run that we had. What you see here is the advisor does begin in equilibrium. In equilibrium, he's supposed to mix when he sees alpha, which is the left-hand side. He's supposed to mix 50-50. Okay. And when you see beta, you're supposed to be telling the truth. Now, as Peter made clear, this is the stage game equilibrium. So this is the one-shot equilibrium. And as Peter made clear, in a repeated game, there could be some sort of a punishment that will make the advisor learn to tell the truth. Okay. So what's happening here, though, is that the advisor here is essentially doing that. He's learning to be honest in alpha. Okay, so which doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's go through a few things here. The advisor doesn't want, so if the advisor, let's go back to the payoff here. Okay. Certainly the advisor doesn't want to be rejected. Okay. The advisor definitely wants to be believed in beta. Okay. In alpha, the advisor has mixing. If the advisor is believed in alpha, right? So when you see A, so here's the thing: you don't see alpha or beta. The investor doesn't see alpha or beta. The investor sees A or B. Okay. Just give me a second. Come here. And just sorry, I have a little child here. I'm gonna give him some YouTube here in the middle. Here, watch this. This is he wants mama, which he's not going to get. Just a second. Mama went. Here. Sorry, I'm making cocoa melon. Just give me 1 second. This is part of the presentation. Here. There you go. Oh, too loud.
Just for you to know, I will not give you additional time, you know.
I know that. That was part of the presentation. That was dragging time since I only have 30 slides. There you go. All right. So anyhow, so this is the payoff matrix. The investor here wants people to follow him in B. He wants to tell the truth in B. He doesn't want it in beta. He doesn't want to tell the truth in alpha. He wants to mix in alpha. He's starting by mixing. He's learning to tell the truth. Okay, what is the advisee doing? The advisee is starting by also kind of in equilibrium. They are believing they're believing everything that they see. When they see A, they believe it. When they see B, they don't believe it, or they mix. So everything is starting in equilibrium, and then it goes to hell. It goes to somewhere not good. They basically, I think the way that we see it, Peter, and this is different from how you see it, the way we see it is that we take lying in observed advice, that we take lying in B, when we see B, as a sign that we should stop believing A. Because if you look at this, what's happening here is
But
that
how many
actually,
observations you have?
PFM, how many observations do we have? This is the old stuff that we ran a lot. I can't hear you, on mute.
You mean dyads? About 40 dyads, I think.
Okay.
So this is not consistent so much with repeated game strategy, but if you write it down, that we do need to look at it. There's the usual suspects there, Grim Trigger, tit for tat, all this good stuff. We can look at some of that, but I don't think that we saw any of that. I think what we saw is just very simple learning of the investors basically just dropping really sharply from believing A, which they should believe 100%. Right? So if you look at what the advisor is doing, when the advisor is giving you A, that's 100% truthful. When the advisor is giving you A, it's 100% truthful. And you should believe it.
And Hernan, over time, their payoff increases because of this learning? So it's away from equilibrium?
No, they're learning bad. Their learning decreases. But again, I just want to stress that. I mean, repeated game strategy we will look at, but what's happening is when you see A at the beginning and at all times, when you see A, you know that the state is alpha. Okay. When you see A, the state is alpha because the advisor is telling you 100% of the time. When the state is beta, the advisor is telling you 100% of the time B. So if the advisor is always honest in beta, when you see A, that's it. It's guaranteed to be alpha. But the problem is that when you see B, it's not guaranteed to be beta. And so what you're doing is you're dropping your belief in A.
Oh.
You're spilling over. That's what we're seeing so far. And we can try to look at some repeated game strategy, but it's not looking like that's what's happening.
You
But
know,
we
it
will
might be related to the so-called the fundamental attribution error that people think that it's not the environment, but the person is either a liar or truthworthy, right? So this is basically your story.
exactly. So it's reinforcement in telling the truth. And that's what we're going to see in the next experiment as
Okay.
well. So this was the warm-up, actually, believe it or not. So we will do the main experiment now. And you'll see that even more painfully. But Yefim, do write it down. We'll do some repeated game strategy analysis right after this seminar.
Right now.
Okay, cool. All right. And thank you, Peter, for that. That was very useful. Okay, so the main study. So learning to prefer bad advice by strategically lying advisors. So this is here, we're not going to have each state being having a profile, but we're going to pull the profile. This in the history. We're going to give you a truthful or a profile of how often you were the advisor was truthful. So the advisor is basically building a reputation. This is a picture of Taylor Swift with her reputation album. But essentially, the advisor is trying to build a reputation, and the advisor is doing that when it's not costly for them to do so. So in different states, there's different costs to being honest or not, just like in the experiment we just presented. So in the experiment we just presented, the cost for being honest in state beta was 0 because it was optimal for you, right? And the cost for being honest in state alpha was quite substantial because you didn't want people to follow, or you wanted people to follow your advice, but you didn't want them to do what's correct. So we're going to continue with that. Okay. So now we're going to talking, and this is the way Efim wanted to write the paper. We're going to be talking about supplier as the advisor and the retailer as the advisee. Okay. So this is a supply chain context, and the reason that if I wanted to write just for clarity, because I kept switching the definitions there, but this was motivated by a supply chain problem. So let me just go very quickly into supply chain. In supply chain, those of you that are familiar with supply chain, it's very common for the manufacturer to be given advice to the retailer. So that especially happens with bottling companies like PepsiCo and Coke, both Coca-Cola. They both very much aggressively manage the layout of the retailers of the grocery stores. So Pepsi will go to a grocery store, will not just look at the Pepsi section, at the soft drink section. They will advise you on tuna and on everything. They will just go and rearrange all your shelves because they have superior data. They have data across the United States. They're able to see demand trends and so on. So instead of seeing one store, which the store does, they see all the stores. So they advise on assortment, shelf space, promotion, pricing, and so on. And the retailer the retailer can decide whatever they want, but the supplier gives a recommendation. And again, the supplier advises because he can see multiple retailers, and the retailer sees only themselves. They have a better demand forecasting, and they have panels, experiments, launches. They just spend a lot more money on consumer studies to learn their own demand. Okay, so again, the places where you see this is especially with Procter & Gamble. I'm a big consumer of diapers for some reason. Procter & Gamble very aggressively manages the diaper section. And Coca-Cola, of course, I've worked a lot with Pepsi and Coke on that. Now, in Amazon, it was the opposite. So, in Amazon is a retailer. right? And the way that it works for Amazon is, and you may not know that, I'm sure that all of you buy stuff from Amazon. Let me know if that's not the case. But you may not know that 70% of the stuff that you buy from Amazon is not procured by Amazon from vendors. It is sold by Amazon as essentially a middleman between third-party suppliers, most of them located in China, at least at the time that I was there, and consumers, most of which are located in the United States and Canada, and a little bit in Europe. The way it works is those Chinese suppliers, just 70% of the third-party suppliers, which are themselves 70% of the overall supply, they have no idea what the demand is. They need demand signals from Amazon. Now, Amazon wants to lie to those Chinese suppliers, and the reason Amazon wants to lie is because the incentives are not aligned. Sometimes Amazon needs more supply, right, to make sure that they don't have a shortage. And sometimes they want less, depending on their situation in their fulfillment center. The fulfillment cost is very, very high. And so the advice that we give, the forecasting advice, is generally distorted. We called it, and I shouldn't be saying any of that, right? But anyhow, I am. We call it Amazon-centric versus seller-centric, right? Are we giving advice that's good for them or giving them advice that's good for us? And there's a debate going on which advice to give. Okay, back to this. Okay, back to the last long time. Ever since I started working with Ido, he has been working on this, which is overweighting frequent small gains relative to rare large losses. I'm sure I'm a co-author in several of those papers. So we're going to take that insight and move that to market design to give people bad advice. In terms of recommendation, that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to give people a lot of frequent cookies, like small, truthful advice, so that we're able to lie to them when it matters. And by the way, going back to Amazon, most of the periods are very, very stable. So I was actually doing a lot of the forecasting there, and I was able to forecast almost on the unit. So most days I can tell you exactly what's going to be the demand that day. There are only a few times in the year where I have no idea what's going to happen, right? Like Christmas, or where I'm just basically just shooting darts blindfolded, right? So Christmas, Thanksgiving, the various prime days and a few other holidays and high peak days. And of course, every time the Houthis do something also is hard. Because I have to predict not just demand, I have to also predict arrivals. So those two things are on both the supply and demand are very tricky. But most days I can predict everything perfectly. And so I am able to give cookies or little truthful predictions to people and get them to supply a lot during the days that I have no idea what's going on. All right, so providing correct advice frequently enough to build. All right, moving on. I have an hour, Yefim, right? So half an hour more? All right, very cool. All right, so again, the state of the world is determined.
Includes questions time.
Includes question. All right, I'll be quicker. State of the world is known, is revealed to the supplier. The supplier issues a binary recommendation, choose A or choose B. The retailer decides whether to follow or ignore these recommendations. So, and that's repeated 100 rounds. Any questions about the setting? It's pretty simple. All right. By the way, this is yesterday. I got this email from Gila Fruchtel. Is she in the audience? Can you check, Ethan? All right, very cool. I'm not seeing her. She sent me this email yesterday with the word thanks. It was a very short email, and it acknowledged, I'm deeply grateful to Hernán who inspired the central idea of the paper, provided insightful. So this is basically if you read this paper, I'll send you the paper, Yefim. It's basically the equations that I envision this to work in. So the way the trust dynamics are, they work. I think of this as an optimal. So I don't think of this as a repeated game as much as just a reaction game where the supplier is essentially optimizing its its trust profile. And so that equation 1 is the main equation that I wrote, which is basically saying, so think of the state here. Think of the state. Sorry, I have to fix the cocoa melon again. Here, there you go. Think of the state as a state of trust, and the trust is the decreasing in the lying. So S here is trust, U is the amount of lying, C is some constant. So the change in trust is decreasing in the amount of lying there, and then there's some decay. And so that's essentially how I work those set of equations. And it was published in a very prestigious journal. I'm not a co-author here, but it was published in the prestigious Journal of Modern Economy. 3 months after being submitted, it already appeared in writing. So I'm sure it's a very good journal. Anyhow, definitely should look at it to see how those equations work, how that control works. All right, back to the experiment. This is the study. It always happens. Sorry, I'm doing 2 presentations at once here. Okay, so this is the screen, A and B, 2 buttons, and then the feedback is the feedback screen is such that the feedback that you received is more prominent and the other one is dimmed. And then it says the payoff from selecting the other key is presented in dimmed, which is hopefully makes sense. So any questions about the design? It's a very simple experiment, screen and feedback. Okay. So these are the payoffs, and the payoffs are pretty simple. So there are 2 states of the world. One of them is we can call it the low volatility state, and the other is the high volatility state, and they look exactly the same. So the real difference between them is in this little epsilon. There's epsilon BL and epsilon BH. So in the high volatility state, epsilon BH is very high. In the low volatility state, epsilon BL is very low. Very low and high, I mean variance, right? So epsilon BL, both of them have expected value of 0, but epsilon BL has a very low variance. Epsilon BH has a very high variance. Okay, the expected payoff from not conditional advice. If you ignore advice completely, you get C in pi A and you get C minus delta in pi B. Any questions? All right. So the way, we computed the expected values here. So basically C is 250. Epsilon A has is uniform between minus 150 and 250. You can just adjust it to have expected value. I'm not sure why we wrote it that way. I think in the paper we actually changed it to have expected value of 0, and we moved it to C. The probability of L of being in the low volatility state is 0.9.
You're not on the full screen now.
I'm not on full screen?
No.
Okay, what are you seeing though?
The slides on the... Yeah, now we see on the full screen.
All right, so I'm not sure where it got messed up, but this is the experiment, 2 buttons, feedback. This is the payoffs. Again, the only difference is the epsilon BL epsilon BH between the low volatility and high volatility. Variance is very, very high here, very, very low in the BL. The expected value is higher in A. Okay. So we have one treatment where delta is 0 because we want to see the preference, how the preference changes when the 2 are identical in expected value and just different on expected variance. So basically the way we operationalize the epsilon BH is we have it's a plus 400 minus 400 with probability 0.5 each. So it's just a giant reward or punishment equally likely. It just messes up the variance a lot. Okay. So a few assertions from the supplier's perspective, because here, unlike the previous experiment, where the supplier was or the advisor was sometimes aligned with the advisees and sometimes not. Here, the supplier is always opposed to the advisee. The supplier always wants the advisee to do bad things or to do the bad things for themselves. Okay, so telling the truth all the time would be terrible for the supplier, because since the supplier is getting literally the opposite of the advisee. If the advisor told the truth all the time and the advisee followed it, then the advisor would make the absolute lowest possible payoff that the advisor could make under all possible scenarios. Same with lying all the time. If you lie all the time, it's the same as telling the truth all the time, right? The advisee will always do the opposite of what you say. Okay? And so those two scenarios will give you the lowest possible payoff of all possible payoffs that you could ever make. So both are dominated strategies, and we're not going to consider them. They're just degenerate strategies. They're stupid. Okay. So we're going to look at a few strategies that are not as stupid, right? This is just a math calculation, so I'm going to move forward. This is here, which I'm just showing that if I'm always recommending A, I'm always recommending B, then I'm going to be ignored. And everybody's going to just choose, choose the expected value for both of them is 250. Under the when delta is 0, I show what happens when it's always truthful, when you're always lying, when you strategically lie. Anyhow, moving forward, let's look at the strategies that we do look at. So we look at essentially two major strategies. One is disingenuous trust building, which is to tell the truth in the low volatility behavior. Low volatility, this is low volatility state rather, not behavior. Just a typo. Low volatility state. In the low volatility state, you always tell the truth. Now, why would you do that? Remember, the low volatility state is a probability 0.9. So if you tell the truth in the low volatility state, you're getting 90% of the time you're telling the truth. You're only lying 10% of the time in the high volatility state. So under the behavioral pattern that established by Ido, that it's better to be right most of the time than to be right on average or right in expectation, this should do well. The accuracy of this, at least in terms of the number of the hit rate of being truthful, is very high, it's 0.9. The expected value here is very low, because whenever you're getting the big rewards, the plus 400, minus 400, then you're getting screwed. So the payoff for the advisee is very low. Under good advice, you lie 90% of the time. You lie in the low volatility behavior, but you tell the truth in the high volatility behavior. Now, from equilibrium perspective, from game theory perspective, the two should be kind of, at least if you learned, if you were able to learn those, they should be equivalent, right? Because they're kind of isomorphic, but they're not, right? Because here, because there is still the label of lie and tell the truth. And so here, you are basically, if you were to follow the advice, 90% of the time you would be wrong. 10% of the time you'd be right with a very high consequence, but the problem is that the updating is very rare. And then there's the no advice, which is the baseline. All right, moving forward to hypothesis. So the first hypothesis, or the first kind of premise here, is that it's better to be right most of the time, that you would get the advice accepted in the frequency of being correct, not in how well you are maximizing expected value of how well you're maximizing expected value of the advisee. And so the way we stated in the hypothesis, advice will be adhered to more with disingenuous trust building than with good advice. It's better to be better most of the time than to be higher in expected value. Percentage following the advice in good advice is less than the percentage following advice in disingenuous trust building. Second hypothesis is that A is the better choice, okay? We have two treatments here. One of them is payoff dominance, where A is better in expected value, better than B by delta. The other one is, we call it the risk dominance, which is A is not better than expected value. Expected value A and B are the same, but A has much lower variance. Okay, so because we wanted to look at both the variance preferences and the expected payoff preferences. Okay, the hypothesis is that the choice of A, which is the better choice, the utility maximizing choice, will happen the most under the no advice and the least under the disingenuous trust building. Okay, so if you want to really mess up people and make them do what's good for you and not what's good for them, then do the disingenuous trust building. If you want to maximize or for people to learn good, don't give them any advice. That's basically it. So under no advice, people learn good. Under advice, they learn bad. Okay. Here are the results. So the first, the top graph is whether people follow advice or not. And we are showing you the disingenuous trust building versus the good advice. Disingenuous trust building is when you tell them the truth 90% of the time, but lie to them when the payoffs are consequential. The consequential payoffs are plus 400. I mean, they're 400 consequence. The consequence is 400 tokens, which is a massive amount. So only then you lie to them and you take their 400 tokens. And you can see that people learn to follow that advice about 30% more than when you actually give them correct advice. So the correct advice here being 90% of the time you lie to them, but you're not really lying to them. You are telling them the wrong advice, but it's the consequence of following that wrong advice is minuscule. And the 10% of the time that you give them the meaningful advice, that's the real payoff influencer of 400. But nevertheless, people are learning bad. They're learning to follow you when you lie. The first column is the risk dominant, where there's no difference between expected value, and it's just the A is lower variance. In the second one, A is actually quite a bit better in expected value. Okay, so then in the choose A, you see that we're kind of getting a little, at least in the risk dominance, where there's no difference in expected value. Both of the advice are kind of pulled together, but you see the no advice, the gray line, is much better. That is, people are maximizing their choices quite a bit more, and they're learning nicely too. They're not flat. They're learning to choose A, which is sweet. And then in the payoff dominance, which is on the right-hand side, you also see learning. It's a little bit flatter, but still very nice learning. Slow, but nice. And they are at 60% of optimization, and you can see that with the advice, you see that the good advice is better than the bad advice, but it's still quite a bit below the no advice. Okay. Now there was a question about payoffs. The payoffs are kind of all over. Obviously, the good advice, the payoffs they can be slightly better, but it's not significant, at least not in the payoff dominant version. Okay, so just to summarize the results, and I think I'm doing good on time, even with the Cocomelon interruptions. The advisee follows the bad advice most under the disingenuous trust building. So if you want the advisee to follow your advice, then disingenuous trust building is best. Choosing A, which is the better choice, the optimal choice, happens the most under the no advice, which is expected. Okay. So now we're doing an advisor study, which is to see whether the advisors can learn to lie. And so the way that it works with the advisor, so this is about 160 subjects. The human decision maker is in the role of advisor. He observes the states of the world and makes a recommendation A or B. And we program the advisee here to be very basic best responder. That is the advisee here. As long as you're truthful more than 50% of the time, we follow your advice. And if you lie, we randomize. Okay? So it's a kind of it's a very primitive advisee, but the idea is to see whether advisors are learning to lie in that scenario. The advisor screen is again recommend A or B. You see your own payoffs. You see the retailer's payoff. And then the feedback screen. In the feedback screen, you see again what was chosen. You see what you recommended, and then you see what was actually chosen. Your recommendation was B, so the B is kind of in a different color, but the retailer chose A, so you see that the payoffs correspond to A, and then you see all of that information on the bottom. Questions about the experiment? Okay. You also see the percentage of recommendations that were truthful, and that's showing on top, on the bottom, and that percentage is what determines the advisee's decision. Okay, so what we see here is very clear learning to lie. Suppliers learn very quickly to lie when the stakes are large, and tell the truth when the stakes are small. When the stakes are small, meaning the low volatility stakes are large, meaning the high volatility stakes, the plus 400, minus 400. Those are giant stakes. You see that there's a little bit of learning to lie, a little bit of less, but it's not super. It first increases, then it decreases. It does go down over time from 75 to 60. And this is in the pay. Now we switch the order of payoff dominance. So this is the payoff dominant side now. So this is when when B is quite a bit worse than A. Suppliers to advisors learn to lie a little bit less over time, but it's a weird shape. And you see that much more pronounced in the risk dominance. You see that suppliers are learning, first of all, to lie. Okay. Sorry, it's the other way around. Okay. They're learning to tell the truth. And then for the small consequence, they're learning to lie for the large consequence. So they're first learning to lie for large consequence, then continue to learn to lie. So the lying goes down to basically from 0.5, from the truth telling goes down from 0.5 to 0.2. So this is in the risk dominance. The risk dominance, the A and B have the same expected value, but A is far less volatile. Okay. So what's happening in that treatment? For the large payoff, you start with lying half the time, and then you are learning to lie 80% of the time. For the small payoff, you are starting by lying 65% of the time. Telling the truth 65% of the time. You learn to tell the truth even more. The truthfulness goes up to 75%, and then the truthfulness drops to 55%. So it's kind of an N-shaped or inverse U-shaped. And I think that holds for both the payoff dominance and risk dominance. Okay, this is kind of a hard graph to follow. But we kind of need to, I think that's the most interesting graph to see. That's the most interesting graph to see. So in that graph, what we're seeing is when the suppliers have, if the suppliers have got to a point where they're no longer believed due to a history of lying, then what's happening is that at that point, they switch their strategy. So suppose that you've lied for a while and nobody believes you anymore. Now your optimal strategy changes. So let's kind of go back to when you haven't lied, when you're sort of mixing the lying and truthful telling, and you are optimizing your lying strategy. At that point, when you're optimizing lying, you should be lying in the small stakes, telling the truth in the small stakes to build reputation, and lie in the high stakes to exploit the trust that you've built. Right? Okay, what happens if you've been lying for a while and nobody believes anything you're saying? Sorry. Okay, the kitty has scratched the little baby. All right. So what's happening there is if you have been lying for a while, nobody believes you. Now the optimal strategy switches. At this point, you should tell the truth when the stakes are high. Why would you tell the truth when the stakes are high? Because nobody believes you anyway. So there's no cost to you. The cost to be telling the truth when the stakes are high is zero to you because you're not being believed. And so it's better to lie, to tell the truth in both states. Your reputation building is now free. There is no cost to building reputation when you've lied. And in fact, what's going to happen is if you look at so when you see lying there, the gray and the yellow, lying means you have a lying profile. You've been lying. Okay, so the gray and yellow graphs on these the gray and yellow curves are conditional on a lying profile. You've been lying and nobody believes you. So in that case, you see that the yellow, especially on the so the yellow here, especially on the risk dominance, you see that the yellow is below the gray. That means that you tell the truth more when you have the large stakes than when you have the small stakes. You see that on the risk dominance a lot more. Okay, so all right. So with that, I think that's the main insight here is that you should be telling the truth when the stakes are small. You should be lying when the stakes are large, and you should be reversing that when you have no cost to telling the truth. All right. So with that, I'm going to conclude and take questions. The bad advice is believed, so concluding, the bad advice is believed most when it implies correct recommendations most of the time. Advisees learn to follow bad advice. Advisors learn to give bad advice. And advisors give good advice in high stakes only when it's costless, only when they've built a lying reputation. And in that case, they have zero cost of building a good reputation, especially in the high stakes. All right, so if I have questions, I have time for questions?
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Oh, wait, I have one more slide. I have one more slide. Reputation gets pulled. So we do have evidence. That's what Ido said. Reputation gets pulled. That people have some sort of a lying profile or a honest profile, even when you are not pulling the reputation, even when you're telling them, when you're giving them separate reputation for each advice. We also showed the case when the advisor was aligned with the advisor in one stage and not in another, and that way truth-telling went up, away from equilibrium. And again, with the caveat that Peter's right, that we should be looking at some grim trigger tit for tat, which I don't remember having, but we still don't have them in the slides. And then we show another case where the advisor is always opposite to the advisor. In that case, the lying is strategic. We see that advisors are lying strategically, and we see that switch when they have been lying too much. Okay, now I'm ready for questions.
Thank you.
Questions? Yeah.
So now is the time for questions.
Lower the volume here. You're too loud. All right, here.
So do you understand? Ido, you wanted to say something? No.
No, I can, yeah. So basically you have several story here. It's not one paper, or none.
It's done?
So you have several story here. One interesting story is that related to the reputation building. So according to the rational model, you should lie in one situation and say the truth in another situation, or just a mix in one situation and says the truth in another situation. But
right.
For some reason, if you do that, people just might lose their. So this is a really important observation. That the deviation for I don't know if it's known in the literature. The deviation from the signaling game is in the direction that the responder basically treat you as liar or not, right? So this is one
That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. But at least, I mean, it's very interesting that they are actually at the beginning, they're starting very nicely in equilibrium, which is very surprising, actually. It's a very complicated
Yeah.
game. I'm not even sure that Yefim would start in equilibrium, but they do, which is very nice.
Okay, so this is not related at all to the rare event story. Then maybe you can,
No.
right? So there's two different papers. So you say it's a paper and a half, but there's two different stories here. Right, I'm
Right.
correct. So you said you have a paper and a half, but I will not combine the two because it's already difficult to understand. The thing with the pooling, the fact that the reputation building is unconditional, is over task, is really important. But I don't know how. I don't know. I'm not familiar enough in that literature.
I'm also not familiar with that literature. So which one? The first one, or the second one?
No, the first one that
Yeah, the first one we're making up that literature. I mean, there's not a whole lot of literature there. This is this whole advisee in a financial setting. There's a lot going on. I mean, there's a very complicated mixed strategy equilibrium, but it's very
Yeah,
amazing
but
that they actually
there
start
is a
this.
literature in social psychology that people what is called the fundamental attribution error, which is one of the most important finding in psychology, and it's pretty
Okay.
robust. So relating it will be very interesting. So maybe you said it's emerged within these settings. So instead of seeing what a person does in different states, and you just thinking because it's a person, you just say the guy's liar or not. So that's it. You
Very
should
cool.
try to connect it to this literature in social psychology. I don't know if probably people thought about its relationship to game theory, to game theoretic consideration in signaling game, but I'm not sure. So it's important to check.
We will do that. Thank you. Okay, what about the second one? That was a lot more tied to your. That was
Yeah,
completely either inspired.
yeah. No, that one is nice and consistent with my story. But I was not it was not clear you have to simplify it. It was not easy to follow all the results, in particular with the variance. Why the variance was how the variance is connected to the probability of success. So you come up with a story from Amazon that sometimes you don't know, right? But
Right. So in Amazon, it's very important. Amazon, it's all about variance, right? Because
But your incentive as Amazon is larger when you don't have when you have variance. When you have variance, you want more people to produce.
So when you have variance in Amazon, what happens there, and it's very either consistent. So if you ever need to to hire you, they would definitely do that. But what they've learned is that people don't follow advice when it's high variance. So when you have
Oh,
a high variance, people hate the advice. They ignore it. And
okay.
so we wanted to have kind of they stay away from high variance advice.
Oh, I see. So this is a third story.
Yeah,
Okay.
so maybe we can take it out. I'm not sure, but I
No,
think I
no,
mean
it's an important phenomena.
there's both
Definitely.
variance and expected value. Those are both important.
Yeah. No, no, this is very important. It's also related to global warming, right? So basically,
Is it?
people say all the scientists don't know what they're talking about global warming because the weather changed
Right.
quite dramatically. And so this is very important observation. Um, okay. That is probably one of the most important observation of our time, why people don't trust scientists. And part of the problem is that scientists try to predict what happened with high variance condition.
Right.
Okay. Okay, that's so no, I think you guys have several interesting story, but probably you want to, but it was a little bit difficult even for me to understand. So dividing the story probably will help you out with marketing. So that you will be able to give bad advice to reviewers to accept.
Right. The story is divided. So the first paper is a finance paper with Mike Rebello, and the second one is a supply chain paper with just Yefim and I. that we've been trying to write for a very long time.
But within the last paper, you still have this story about the different impact of variability and rare events.
Right.
And when the interaction between the two is also interesting, but try to show each one of them separately before you study the interaction. This is just, my effort to.
No, say it again. I don't study
No, you
what.
basically have two stories there.
Right.
One is that people are underweight to an event, and for that
Right.
reason, it's better for you to lie when in the rare cases, give accurate information when it doesn't cost much, and lie when and they do not notice that you lie on the important thing. Another thing that when the variance is large, people will ignore even good advisors. If an advisor is always good with high variability, it's possible that scientists are exactly correct about global warming. Nevertheless, most voters don't believe them. So this is a different story. Of course, there's interaction between the two, but presenting in the same experiments make it harder to people who's outside of the field to understand, because each one of the stories is already unknown and it's not well understood. So combining them together, I would do only in a third experiment after showing the two different effects and then the interaction between the two. This is just, with me, without being sure that I understand exactly your stories. But my point is that it seems that you have three different findings, but it's a little bit hard to fully understand them. Maybe it's also happened because you have a baby on your, you did two things while presenting to
Well, I did multiple things. Yeah, there was a cocoa melon involved.
So try next time to present only
without the cocoa melon. Yeah, I will try.
You did well. You did very well. And it's clear that the results are interesting, but I think there should be a simpler way to explain them.
Okay, did you write that down, Yefim? I'm trying to. I have.
You have a nice cat there, by the way.
Anyways, but he scratched the baby.
Our time is running, so those who have to leave are now welcome to leave. Anand, thank you again for this great presentation. Those who want to stay are welcome to stay for the informal part of our seminar for a few more minutes, and I'm closing the recording right now.
Right, thanks, Glenn.